Okay, Kushal, you're up.
Yeah, let me share my screen and we shall start. Yeah, so we have two MRs which basically track the changes for infinite timeline scrolling. It currently supports all three presets, and I have the page open here. I have kept the DevTools open. I'll explain the reasons why. So let me just reload this page for now, and the initial load shows the epics which fall in the default time frame that we have, which would be current month, 1 month previous, and 5 months into the future. And when you start scrolling into the future, so as you can see, like the scroll bar is slowly moving towards the right edge of the screen. But once it reaches to the very edge of the timeline itself, new time frame is added, and you would notice that there is a network request that happened just when we scrolled it to the edge of the timeline. This was basically to pull in the epics for the next time frame that just got added. Now, if I scroll further ahead, you would notice that we have this one more epic item shown up. This would continue as long as we continue to scroll. Notice how the newly added epic shows up as a fade in animation. So there you go. As you notice, like this last item got added, and scroll bar is further away from the right edge, and it goes on. So there isn't any threshold, be it towards scrolling towards the future or scrolling towards the past. As long as user continues to scroll, we would continue to pull in the data, and we are adding the items, and basically we are expanding the timeline in chunks of the same size as the default size of the timeline for a given view, just to make sure that we do not end up making a lot of requests by adding single months on every scroll. So for instance, in the months view, we are showing 7 months by default. So every time user scrolls in to the right edge or the left edge of the timeline, we would add 7 more months from the future or from the past, and would pull in the data for that time frame and show it into the timeline. So if we go back into the past as well, so let me scroll back, and we have the Jan showing up. Now, if I go back again, there is one more epic item added. You would also notice, like on the initial load, so in the original roadmap design, we didn't have, we had the fixed timeline for the original design. And then what we had was that if an epic has a start date which doesn't fall within the time frame that we are showing, we would be showing that triangle at the end of the timeline bar, just to show, just to indicate like this particular epic is outside the, it starts outside the time frame, or the end, or it ends outside the time frame. But since we are supporting infinite scrolling now, we would also update those existing epic items to make sure like the timeline bars are expanding to cover the entire time frame that they are supposed to. So for instance, when we loaded this page, we had these four epics which had the start date. So for instance, this one was starting at the in June 25th of 2018, and similarly for rest of the items. So if I continue to scroll back, those bars are now expanding as well. So as I scroll more into the past, these items would continue to expand. You would also notice like the moment timeline bar is updated with the new time frame, there is this slight fade in animation as well for those items. So if we do not like that animation, like for instance, we have 5 epics to be shown by default when the page loads, and if user continues to scroll in either ways, if the number of epics do not change, only the timeline bar's length is changing, then if we do not want animation there, I would change the code to make sure like animation doesn't happen. But right now, it is sort of a boring implementation where animations would happen every time a timeline bar updates. So if I scroll back further, so as you saw, like the first item was starting in June 25th. So the bar is now updated to reflect that approximately for this particular month. Same thing goes for the second item as well, which was starting at the 2nd April. So the timeline bar indicates the same. And as we continue to scroll behind, the scroll bar also updates. So as you can see, scroll bar is again further away from the left edge, and the items are shown up accordingly. So if we change the view, if we go into the weeks view, then same thing happens. So right now, since current week only has a finite length of start and finish, we are showing only two items. So if we start scrolling that, it would basically pull in more weeks. And the moment that there are more epics to show, so like this third epic showed up right when new time frame got added, it would continue to add in those items into the timeline as well. So this is again happening in real time. It is basically pulling the data for the time frame, adding into the store, and UI reflects the same. Same thing goes if we go into the past as well. So there you go. So like a lot of items got added, and yeah. So this one was starting at 6th of September. So the bar is updated to reflect the same. This one is starting in April, so of 2019. So if we are going back into 2019, then it would show the time frame for the same. So there you go. So as the user continues to scroll, there isn't any kind of limit or threshold that we have put. It will continue to basically expand the timeline. And all three presets support this functionality. So yeah, that is it. And now, if we go to the list of concerns that we had, so I already posted a brief message in our channel regarding the design intricacies that we realized after the implementation of this feature. So I'm going through the list from the Slack itself. So most of the points were conquered by both Pedro and Annabelle. Like we were fine for most of the items, but two major items that I find sort of a deal breaker to push this functionality forward. First is right now, as you can see, like when the time frame expands, be it into the future or into the past, we are appending the items into the list of the epic. So sorting doesn't happen on the UI. That wasn't the case even before. So right now we do not apply any kind of sorting, or we do not even consider what is the sorting order that was selected for the particular layout. And we just append the items, whatever new items that are pulled in when the request happens, and we just
When you
add
say
it in.
append, you mean just at the bottom of the?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so no matter where it falls, when the list is sorted, it will always be appended. And the thing is, like, if we do want to sort it on UI, then what would happen is we would have to re-render the whole thing. So, like, there are a couple of technical reasons as well. So, the way Vue.js does it is that when you push in new item into the store, it renders only newly added items. It doesn't re-render the existing items. So for instance, if we are pushing, if we are sorting the list, and initially, so for example, if initially we had only 5 items in the list, and we scrolled into the future, and two new epics showed up into the list, then for instance, if sort order is such that those 2 items need to be at the second and third position into the list, then we would have to insert it into the store, and that would lead to pushing all the following items further down into the list, right? So that would mean everything starting from the second position would have to re-render again, and that is costly from the front end perspective as well. So that was one concern. Another concern is that, so as you can see, when the page is loaded, we have, so for instance, if we are in this quarter view, then we have first quarter showed up as the initial column in the timeline. Then we have second quarter. And if I scroll into the future first, and then if I scroll back, you would notice we just expanded the timeline into the past. So the way this scroll detection works is that what I do is when the timeline is rendered, Annabelle would probably understand what I'm trying to explain here. Like when the timeline is rendered, I take two elements from the entire timeline, the very start edge of the timeline and very end edge of the timeline. And when the scroll event happens, I would detect whether this edge element came into the viewport or not. If it does, I would expand the timeline depending on which edge came into the viewport, be it the past or be it the future, and and I would continue to update these edge elements for both start and end as long as user continues to scroll, just to make sure we continue to expand the timeline as long as user is scrolling. So for this to work on initial load as well, we need to determine how many more items we need to show on the page load. So for instance, if I would just close this DevTools, and if I go into the months view, the page would reload. And right now, as you can see, I don't have scrolling available horizontally, because the way we designed roadmap was that if there is a space available to fit in all the columns for a particular preset, we would utilize that space depending on the screen size, and we would decide whether to show the horizontal scroll or not. Pedro would remember this conversation, like if we have the space, if we have the horizontal space available, we would utilize that space and expand the column size for each of the column in the timeline. But for instance, if we shrink the window size and if there isn't space available, we have the scroll bar, because we have a certain minimum width that we need to respect for individual columns in the timeline. So again, in case of this infinite scrolling to work, we need to make sure that the horizontal scroll bar is always available, because without that scroll bar available, user will never be able to scroll, and the code which triggers the scroll event and that triggers the expansion of the timeline would never execute, because there isn't any scroll bar available. So for that to work, we need a UX guideline, like how many months into the past we need to further expand our timeline, and how many months into the future we need to expand.
So Kushal, that would
Yeah.
that seems like a easier problem to solve than the first one.
Yes.
So
Yes.
you're saying this, you just need to know essentially how wide the scroll bar would be on initial load as a
No, no,
ratio, or as like it's
no,
going to
no. On initial load, we just need a number, like how
okay.
many months into the past and how many months into the future we need to further increase.
Okay.
Again, this is a tricky problem to solve, because we don't know how large screen size user is on. So for instance, if today we determine, like, okay, we instead of 7 columns, instead of 7 months that we show on the initial load, let's show 12 months, like a full year of range, where we would be showing 3 months into the past and rest of the months into the future.
Right.
But for instance, if user is on like 55-inch 4K screen, for some reason user is using that screen, then all those columns can fit in within the screen without scroll bar showing up. So that is again a tricky problem to solve. What we can do is that we can determine what is the screen size and dynamically
I
assess
see.
how many columns we need to show to ensure that the scroll bar is always available.
So
So again, that is still a simple problem to solve. So yeah.
my question is, right now, regardless of your screen size, we always show 7 months, right?
Yes, yes. So that is a
And we
hard.
want to change that, or we don't? It sounds like we want to change that, but are you saying we should change it or not change it in this iteration?
We do change it even in this iteration, because without which a default view. So right now I'm on a 1440p screen
Right.
on a 25-inch monitor, and as you can see, if I do not have if I'm using a full screen window, then I will never see the scroll bars.
Well, just let's set the scroll bar aside for a minute. And so when you shrink your screen, shrink your window right now,
Yeah.
your browser window, it's always 7 months, right?
Yeah. So there is a limit after which scroll bars start showing up. So for instance, as you can see,
Right.
I shrunk the window and there isn't scroll bar right now. But if I scroll it down further, then as you can
Yep.
see, scroll bar just showed up. And now when I
Oh,
scroll,
okay, I see what you're saying.
the timeline scrolling would start working.
Okay, so essentially, your code is having the width in terms of pixels or whatever. There's like a
Yeah.
minimum width of column
Yes.
that's already in your
Yeah.
code somewhere.
Yeah.
And then, so my question is, say you go back to the opposite extreme right now, and then you maximize your window.
Yep.
My question is that's fine right now for us, but
Mhm.
let's say, so if you refresh your screen right now, I thought that's what I saw, and then there's no scroll bar, right, in the case here.
Yep.
Right,
Yep.
so say, imagine your window is even bigger, like a ridiculous whatever screen.
Yeah.
Then when you first load, the columns will be really fat, and that's a waste of space. So is
Yeah.
that something we want to address in a future iteration, or should we just sort of solve it together, because this is so like, it's so
We can solve it along with this scrolling thing, because both are related. So
exactly, because yeah, I'm worried, like you have a really big screen and then you have really fat columns. And then when
Yeah.
you're scrolling there, it seems silly because you're scrolling really fat columns. We should
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
an algorithm that is dynamic right off the bat. And it sounds like you're solving the same problem right now, so you might as well consider
Yeah. Yeah.
it. Okay.
So again, that is still a simple problem to solve. So either we increase that fixed number of how many columns we need to show on initial load, or we make that number dynamic as well. Like as long as there's a space available,
Right.
we ensure like the column size is always set to that fixed width. And if there is more space available, we would just increase the number of columns. Although we do need a number in case like how many months into the past we need to show, because we need to determine the location of this indicator. So right now we only show 1 quarter, 1 month, or 1 week into the past. And the second column of the timeline, be it any preset, is always the current representation. So it would either be current month, it would be current quarter, or current week. So,
I think we can relax that though. So now that we have scrolling, so for example, like if we take what you just said, so the algorithm sets a fixed width for all screens, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe there's like, so for really small widths, we just like a phone that's in vertical landscape, we just pretty much don't care about it. And then, so it's always a fixed width, and then you always show that red vertical line. So it's always centered or like a third away, whatever. And then if it's so small that you can't show the past, that's okay because we can scroll there. So I think that algorithm or that logic and requirement we can relax now in this new world where it's more important about scrolling in the fixed widths.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, this makes sense. I'm sorry for interrupting.
But the more interesting problem is the sorting one, where we are.
So is that the two major problems right now? Before we tackle.
So this scrolling part is still simple thing to solve.
Okay.
There isn't any concrete. We basically do not need to do any trade-off. Like
Right.
if we do this, then we would lose that. That isn't the case. But for the sorting, again, sorting on the UI side can be happened. Just that it would be computationally intensive in both cases. Like if, for instance, if we just go to the roadmap of GitLab org group as well, and if we see the number of epics, so we are already at 700 epics there. And if we go to the roadmap of that page, then imagine a case where a user just scrolls a bit into the future and 100 new epics show up. And so not only we have to sort 800 epics on UI, all those 800 epics, out of those 800, depending on where we insert the new 100 epics, the rest of the epics would need to be re-rendered as well.
So the performance is the rendering part. Is the front end performance that's the problem?
Yes. Both the rendering on the Vue.js side as well as sorting on our side. But also
sorting,
at the same
but
time,
you mean sorting like front end sorting because we're retrieving things from the back end.
Yes.
So you have to sort and then you put them in the right place. And when you put them in the right place, you move things around, and both of them are costly. And so what does that mean? It just means like the computer will start burning up and it will be slow. Is that what do you mean?
That really depends on how fast your browser can run, depending on the underlying hardware. And at the same time, we do not want the page to freeze up just because it is doing a lot of things on the UI. So that is one problem. But now that I think of that problem further, so since we are looking at GitLab Org's roadmap, for instance, as you can see, like this list is vertically scrolling as well because there are a lot of epics to show. So if we are appending epics into the list, and if user is scrolling into the future, then user would never know whether new epics got added into the list or not until user scrolls further into the bottom of the list and then starts scrolling the timeline. Because we are always adding new epics at the end of the list, not at the beginning of the list. So user would never know where exactly in the list new items got added, or if at all new items got added on the timeline scroll.
So are you saying like in the regular, or maybe we can just talk about the regular, like last time we chatted about like the happy path case, is that things just get added to the bottom or to the top. And then so the rendering, at least the rendering part wouldn't be costly in that case, right? And if they use the due date version and then they're using these ridiculously weird epics, then it would be costly.
Is it possible, since two of those search options are due date and start date, Is it possible to at least detect which one of those has been chosen, and we can append or prepend depending on that?
Yeah, that can be done. So we already have the information, what was the sort order, and that information can be exposed into the roadmap app. And based on that, we can do a simple route. Like if a particular sort order is the due date, then we would basically append the items, and if it is a start date, then we would prepend the items.
So the
So
main two
that can still be
problems. Okay, so the main two problems are created date and last updated. Didn't we
done. Yeah.
discuss removing one of those at some point at least, because it's just not useful information?
I think we said created, and well, we decided for sure, and we have an issue. I'm pretty sure I scheduled it for decoupling the backend saving, but I don't think we scheduled. I'm not sure we even have an issue to actually remove due dates. Not due
Since
date.
we have the list view
created.
where you can use those two search options, would it be horrible to remove those two options from the roadmap?
Yeah,
I think we talked about this last time, and we said for now we were just going to make it so that the sort option didn't
save over.
The sort option wasn't the same on the list and the roadmap, so you could have different sort options on the list and the roadmap. I think we said we could get rid of created and last updated because they don't really make sense on here, but I don't think we actually did it.
So,
as far as I remember.
I think we can just.
I haven't watched the recording.
I would prefer. Well, like Annabelle, like we can remove them, and then so we don't have to worry about this performance thing, or we can leave them, and then they're like just unhappy experiences, unhappy paths, and they're just bad performance, bad experiences for the user. And so I think that's better than just removing it altogether. So at least if they want it, it's there. But
are you saying keep them and just have poor performance for those two options?
Exactly. Yep. Or, well, when you use poor, I would say degraded. Right. So, I mean, that's what it is, right, Kushal? It's not going to be like not a step function. It's going to be, it's gracefully will get worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So.
And for what it's worth, we should definitely develop that ordering function behind the feature flag. So it's if it turns out to be horrible, then we can turn it off temporarily until we fix it. Because there is a potential for degrading performance there. I agree with Kushal. So that's one way. The other is how can we get the information to do the ordering in the first place? But I'll leave that to Kushal and Sean.
Kushal, I have a question. Is the separate from the calendar view?
The epics list here?
Yeah, the epics list, the list on the sidebar. Is it different from the timeline view?
No. So you mean this list, right?
Yeah, that list.
No. Those both are part of a single app. So if I show you the app structure, then this is the roadmap app, and in there we have the shell, and this is the timeline section, and this is the list section. So this timeline is the upper half where you would see the actual column headers, and these are the individual items within those. And if you see the list section, then we have individual epic list item like these. So the moment you expand it, we have first item as epic item details, and then we have individual timeline cells. So here it is.
Yeah. So what I was trying to find out is if the list on the my left hand side, which is contains the details, is different, completely separate from the timeline view, then re-rendering the list might not have such a big performance impact. I'm not sure if you've done any tests. But my assumption would be rearranging a list of items is one of the things that most virtual DOM frameworks have been optimized for. If the cost was just re-rendering this list and it not affecting the rest of the timeline, the performance impact might not be as big as re-rendering the list and re-rendering the timeline at the same time. And this might be a good place to try to use a visual scroller. So the biggest performance impact we might have would be computing, like sorting the list, and then the visual scroller would just take care of updating the items in the list in a performance way. It's just that it would have SEO impacts if that's something.
But so at the same time, what would happen when we would have to synchronize the timeline bars, which represent a particular item into the list? Because so when the time frame expands into the future, we need to make sure that the blue timeline bar representing that particular epic expands as well to cover the new time frame that is available into the area. So we would still end up updating that entire row the moment we expand the timeline. So
yeah, I see what you mean. Now I understand what you mean.
yeah.
So maybe what is the next steps to defer this decision of removing those two sorts, and then as we develop it, and then maybe we don't have to do like hardcore performance tests, but maybe we just do some manual testing and see how horrible or not horrible it is. And then like Andre said, like feature flag it, and then we can see it on staging with production like data. And then if it's really terrible, then we could pull it back, something like that. So
yeah. And one more thing that we can do is that, so right now we have these individual list items have a certain height. So they basically represent the height based on the items that we show within the list item. So for instance, if we go back to the GitLab.com's roadmap, we have 700 items. And this was something that I considered when we originally designed the roadmap. So I wanted to basically do the buffered rendering. So there is something called a windowing approach. So what happens is that at any given point of time, we are showing only 15 to 20 items into the list, not all of those. So even if we are sorting 700 or 800 items in the front end side, those 700 items still live in the JavaScript object, not into the DOM. And what we do into the DOM is that we would push only items that are supposed to be shown into the UI.
Okay.
And based on that, the rendering performance can still be solved because view renderers has to worry only about those 20, 25 items that are shown at any given point of time. Yeah, but all rest of the items live into the object, and that is a standard design pattern to do.
So you're saying JavaScript sorting is not costly, but rendering in the HTML is costly.
Yes.
The way to do it is to show whatever, or to
because
put
it is
the DOM only stuff that's shown.
So it is basically a common front end thing. Like JavaScript isn't slow, DOM is slow. So we do the cutoff only on the DOM side. We do not do any cutoff on the JavaScript side.
Okay, and then you're being actively in throwing out things in the DOM that are not.
Yes. So it would be same as like a window of items to show. So as user continues to scroll, we would discard the items which are outside the view and add in new items which are coming in.
The only downside of this that I want to bring up because of UX is that it kind of breaks the find on this page search of the browser. Like if they want to search on the browser for something that is not on the DOM, if it's out of view, they won't be able to pick it up on that find from the browser. But in this particular case, I don't think that's really problematic because they have the search.
Well, they have the search or filter results there.
Yeah,
they should be using that, or we should be designing.
In those cases, if you want to counteract that effect later, we can always implement our own find an epic, like a filter on the top if we want to. But I don't think that's a very critical aspect. I just wanted to bring it up for UX.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah, no, this is great. I like it. And then so one easy question, Kushal, is stuff that gets added to the epics that get added, they just stay on the page until you refresh it, right?
Yes.
Then I think that's a good design. So just wanted to.
Yeah.
Okay. But well, I mean, we can probably tweak this later in terms of UX. But like, for example, what you're showing there, maybe we just have some additional styling for the blank rows at the bottom, and even for the solid rows at the top. Like you mentioned, the arrow that goes on forever.
Yeah.
We could probably do, but that's totally like a separate future iteration where we can, as we added stuff. And then we scroll away, and then it looks weird because like you don't see any rows anymore. We could have some styling to tell the user, but that to me that's totally future future stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if when you're loading the epics on the right side or left side, do you render both the timeline and the epics at the same time, or do you load the timeline, the chunk, and then wait to receive the epics?
Yeah, so what happens is that when the scrolling happens and time frame is expanded, first thing that happens is we add additional columns for the new time frame that we just that was just arrived. Right after that, we also refresh existing epics to expand those blue timeline bars to accommodate new time frame. And once that happens, we make a request to pull in new epics for the updated time frame, and then we add those into the list. And those
that makes sense to me.
Yeah,
because I'm concerned about the loading, and if you're loading a lot of epics, or if your connection is not the fastest, what would happen? And I think it's really good that we at least are able to, on the client side, to load the rest of the time without.
Let's test it right away. The slow network. So I'm just switching to slow 3G, and there we go. So as you can see, network request got happened and new item got added. Let's slow it down again. Just moving to slow 2G. So the new timeline bar is rendering here, and there you go. Timeline just got expanded, but the network is still pending. And now the network arrived, and
if you scroll to the right, it would show the days and a month.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
So Kushal, I think that's good, but I see a trade-off there. You're looking far into the future, right? That's your query, and then so you're sort of cheating. Well, not really cheating, but you're looking far into the future to grab the backend data and then rendering it. So you have some lead time to help you there. And but I think you're still doing it like, I don't know if transactionally is the point, but you're still doing one thing, which is you look into the future on scroll, and when you get the data back, you show it immediately, even though they might not have rendered up to that blue bar yet. So a future optimization I can think of is you separate this into two steps. You look far into the future to grab things, but when you're just about to scroll to get it, maybe like 2 pixels before, that's when you present it to the screen.
Okay. I got. So basically, order of how we do things. So what you are suggesting is that we make the network proactively.
So like caching, like preactively caching, essentially. Right?
Yeah, and once the data arrives, then we expand the timeline and add in new items. Yeah, we just.
No, I think that's totally like future, like future.
That's a good point.
Type of thing. Like I think this is already great. Like we just tweak. I think right now what we can get a lot of knowledge on is just tweaking.
So if I just
how far you into the future.
Yeah, so this is the exact code where the things are happening. So what happens is that when the scroll happens, we expand the timeline by calling this extend time frame, and the new time frame we basically cache the new time frame for our convenience. And once the store is updated, we re-render the existing epics. And once the re-rendering of existing epics is done, we fetch new epics. So if we just change the order of these two methods, things would happen in reverse, where network request would happen asynchronously, and new epics would start continue to.
Right.
I was going to ask Annabelle if you have thought about a loading state. So when we are, as Kushal was showing, we're loading the timeline for the future, and we have some time, which we don't know how long it would be to get the epics from the server. Did you think about any loading states so the user knows that we're fetching something and that something can appear?
No, I put it as a to-do on the original issue, and I forget why we didn't do that. Probably because I was thinking it would happen instantaneously, but yeah, I'll look into that.
Pedro, I don't think loading state makes sense, at least how Kushal has designed the algorithm. I know it's sort of backwards, we should design it, but from the frame of reference of what Kushal has, he's predicting stuff that's going to be occurring, because you're already scrolling forward, say for example, and then you look further into the future, and then you're already grabbing stuff, and then so let me give the sort of like the counter example. Say you're scrolling into the future and then you suddenly stop. What would happen, if I understand your algorithm, Kushal, is you would load an epic onto the screen, but the bar would not appear on the screen because it's far into the future. And that is actually a bad experience, but I think that's okay for a first iteration, because what I argued earlier is you load stuff, you pre-cache stuff into the JavaScript, using front-end terminology, but you don't load it into the DOM until you're absolutely sure the user is actually gonna get to it on the screen. So, but if you do, if we're thinking from that perspective, then loading state doesn't really make sense, because are you talking about loading when it's pre-fetching from the backend, and why would you expose that information to the user? They shouldn't need to know that.
I think they do, because if it takes some time to get that information, they might scroll into the future, they don't see anything, and they assume that there are no epics there, and that's that. And we don't know how long it would take. So it's the same as having an infinite scrolling list, and you don't know when you've hit the bottom, or you've seen all. Then you get
into these weird scenarios, and that's totally. I don't have an answer to that, Pedro, but I'm just challenging you with another problem, which is like the example I gave, right? You look far into the future and you stop scrolling, and then so you get a loading spinner, and you stop loading the spinner, and
nothing happens.
And nothing happens, right? Or maybe just the epic item appears, and the bar doesn't appear. So I guess that's okay in this particular iteration that Kushal has, because the loading stops. You see the list item on the left, but the bar doesn't appear. And I think that's okay.
No,
then you have an arrow.
Yeah, I think that's totally okay if we don't see the blue bar immediately because it's very far in the future. That's not what I was saying. I was saying the instance where you still don't know if there is something to wait for or not. Because you don't know how long the request is taking, it might be because of your connection, or because the server is not that well configured or not very responsive.
Right.
I don't know how likely this to happen. I'm just wondering if it's, I think it's something that we should think about, because it's, we're loading something, and we should give the user expectation that something might appear before they leave that context, right? Or else they might think, okay, this is it. There's nothing here for me to see. So I switch tabs or I go somewhere else. And that's not true.
Well, I think for this iteration,
very well, then we won't need it. But I agree with you in principle.
I was going to say, for this iteration, I don't think we need a loading state, since this is just the first version. But I was thinking it would be kind of useful to have something like that, kind of like how Gmail says like fetching new mail when you click on the refresh button, and it's just a little toast at the bottom. We don't have toast.
I'm fine with not thinking about this in this iteration. I was just curious.
It's good to bring up. What I propose is we do this, whatever, like clean up whatever, and then the next one I would push for is updating the design so that if you see a list item like on the left side, but there's no bar, you do have some design to indicate where is it on the left or is it in the right. And then once you have that, then if you add the loading state, then it all comes together perfectly, because it loads, then it shows the epic, then you see the feedback right away, which is you see the epic, and then you see the arrow telling you where that timeline is. And so to the user, that's reassuring them, oh, keep scrolling in that direction, you're going to see something, right? And so to me, that's what the loading state will help with.
On that note, Victor, one of the things that I've been thinking on top of the loading to indicate whether we have more data or not is, once we have the new epics coming in and being ordered, I think the important part is users being aware of what was updated. And this is for you, Annabelle, if you want to think about a way to, as they're getting added to the list, having some sort of, the yellow fade pattern that in Basecamp. It's like boom, then fade out.
Yeah, we already have that right now, but you're saying even more pronounced, right, Andre?
We have a fade in. So we have a fade in.
Yep.
I think they just fade into place, but the thing is, after half a second, you don't know. And the thing is, they're focusing in one place of the screen. They see, oh, that moved. What was it? So when they have the yellow fade, it's just like, this was updated. But then again, I defer to Annabelle whether that's a good idea, or just having a dot, or arrow. I have no idea. Just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, for sure. I think somewhere in the issue we were just like, let's get this working. And then I haven't designed any animation for the demo. I think I had it fading in as well. So that was already, that's definitely on my radar. I was thinking originally we would have just the height animate in, but that was when I thought that they would be going in place all the time. So that kind of seems unnecessary. I like the idea of like a full background color flash, like you kind of said. But
if the box doesn't change size, it's easier for performance. So
and there was a weird overflow problem with that. So we won't do that.
Like accordion effect. Like okay, thanks.
Okay, so while we were discussing the timeline, I noticed one thing. As I explained in the beginning, like there isn't any kind of threshold in the timeline, be it upper or lower. Like a user would continue to scroll and timeline would continue to scroll further or behind. But there are situations where there won't be any more epics to fetch. So right now, the way backend works is that as long as there is an epic which falls into a particular time frame, it would continue. It would return those epics into the list. But what if the response is empty? In that case, should we want user to not be able to scroll further into the future? Because that is doable, and that also makes sense, just to basically not to overburden the server in making unnecessary requests, because the response will always be empty, right? So I just did that change. It was just a small line change. I added a flag. We are in the quarter view. And as you can see, first request happened, and we have 2 items in that request. Now, if I scroll further, one more request happened, and now response is empty. So at this point, as you can see, timeline doesn't scroll further into the future because there are no epics to pull in because the previous request was empty. So do we want this kind of experience be part of the design, where if there are no epics to show, then we do not make request at all?
So I think the issue there is so for a product like GitLab, which is being developed all the time, that's fine, because if you don't have a gap in your roadmap, right? You are always working on stuff. I think it might not work so well if you're looking at a sort of product, maybe for an agency or something like that, where they might just work on this, then leave it for a year, then the client comes back and says, can we work on this again? So if you can't load that stuff that's or further in the past, that might be a problem.
Yep.
It might be good if the backend could tell you when the next one was in that case, but I haven't thought that through.
Right. If it can tell you that now it's best into the future, it would make sense just to stop.
Yeah, exactly. I think for now it's probably best to just keep sending the requests, and then the improvement would be to be able to say either stop or here's the next one if there's a gap.
Right.
Sean, in the initial request, can't we know the earliest and the latest epic? That way the front end could just memorize that and don't request anything outside of that interval. Is that possible?
I don't know. Mario, what do you think?
Sorry, I didn't really catch that.
My question is earliest and latest. My question is if it's possible to know the earliest and latest epic that would be listed, and then having that information as part of the initial load on the page, and then the front end could know, don't request anything outside of that limit. And this is for a future iteration, of course. Is this costly?
Yeah. The only thing that would make it costly is if we don't have any indexes on that, but I'm pretty sure that we have indexes on. Oh, actually, sorry. Sean, do you know if we are caching the end date for an epic when we get the end date from issues? We are, right?
From milestones, yeah, we do. Yeah, Mark worked on that.
Then I'm just opening the schema right now to make absolutely certain, but epics should have an index on that, so backend should easily be able to find the earliest and the latest epic.
So I think that information would be useful, Kushal, for the front end for whatever design we have. But I would, from a design perspective, I don't know if like we can always iterate, of course, right? But what's scary to me is if we block the user from continuing to scroll.
Yeah.
I don't think this page is, well, actually, this page is real time by definition of what you've done, right? So if people change epics and add epics,
Yes.
delete epics. By definition, every time you just scroll, it's refreshed. So so you wouldn't have that, right? So if artificially stop them and from scrolling anymore, then you lose that capability. So that's why I think it would be nice if the backend told you that, and then the front end wouldn't let you stop scrolling, but it would be super nice to have like some type of UI to tell you there's nothing into the future. But then that would be messy, because then you have to ping the backend. Like, would you have to pull the backend to say like, or something just to refresh that message so that they can keep scrolling or something like that. So I think there's like a nice to have feature there in any case. I would say the nice to have feature would be like what you mentioned. I don't think is a really common case where somebody's ridiculously scrolling out to the future. Like, why would they do that? But what I think Sean's case does make a lot of sense. If there's just a big gap in time, I think there's got to be a good, like Sean mentioned, a good instance of if there's a big gap in time, then maybe the roadmap just like squashes that time somehow, so that it disappears, or there's some other visual that lets you squash time.
And if we can tell you when the absolute start and the absolute end are, we could also have those available somewhere to you, like as information. Like, you know, you can have like almost a scroll bar type thing, right, that shows you how far across your potential like roadmap timeline you are.
But gaps would not be cheap.
Right. No, I'm thinking some sort of like programming interview question where the back end doesn't give you all that and the front end has to figure that out on the fly type of thing, where Kushal comes up with a really awesome algorithm.
Well, the way we would do it here could be, you know, you ask for the next epic, you get it, and then in the front end computes the gap, right? And then you can just show like a broken, jagged edge where
it has to be done in, it has to be done in linear time, right? And so that's the
it has to be done
without library functions. You're not allowed to use JavaScript library functions. It has to be done in linear time. That's what I'm saying.
By the way, since we're talking about quarters, we got a question I think yesterday in the channel about if we were considering allowing people to customize quarters, you know, because we're moving to fiscal year.
Yeah,
I think that's a great tool for us. I don't like the benefit of. I actually thought about this. Great question, Mario. Like for roadmap view, I think we're still using calendar years. So for milestones at GitLab, we're still using calendar things. So I think it should hopefully have little impact for us, if anything. Like for us as users of the roadmap, I can see this being like annoying for people like Sid maybe, or the other executive people, or people on the sales side, where they look at a roadmap view and then they want to see quarters easily, and then when they click on the quarters thing, it doesn't reflect their quarters, right? So the only feature I could think of that I think would be like I do not want to build is like you could either customize what quarters mean, or like you have like a fourth button that says like fiscal quarters. That would be like horrible, I think. But but that's a great point. Like right now, what Kushal has like Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. I mean, it would be great, I guess, for if those reflect fiscal quarters and fiscal years. But
I think in order to figure out if we should do it, first we need to figure out if people would use it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
the other issue there is that they might start asking for fiscal months. I mean, because our development month, right, is like not the calendar month.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
That's why all of these, like, you know, when you look at the roadmap,
they don't snap to grid
populated from the milestones. They don't actually go to the
edge,
month start and end. And I think we think that's fine. Like, you know, nobody has any difficulty reading what this means, right?
Yep.
Kushal, I just had one question. Like, if we have just one of these dates, like either just the end date or the start date, like would this infinite scrolling have some impact on the rendering of such epics?
No, because what we do is that if an epic is missing either of the dates, only one of the date is present, then the timeline bar shows up as fading out towards the date which isn't available. So in that case, nothing would happen. Just that the timeline bar would continue to fade out for the rest of the time.
Okay.
So that's probably another good reason to have an end to the scrolling. Otherwise, it would just scroll forever.
Could you do an example, Kushal? I just wanted to. Do you actually have that working where you have exactly what Ramya mentioned?
Yeah, let's do that.
I wanted to see like how the CSS renders for the fading if it looks.
I haven't tested that case as well. So
yeah, the gradient should move and consistently.
Exactly. Like how does like.
Man, it's a funny effect.
Yeah, so I have this epic which is starting in October of 2020, which has end date unspecified, and there you go. As you can see, it basically.
Yeah. That's exactly. Oh, is it actually going off into infinity, the white, or is it just refreshing?
Yeah. So the gradient would continue to expand because in CSS we have mentioned 50% of whatever the width of the timeline bar is.
So it does re-render every time, but
yes.
Okay.
So if you notice, we are towards reaching the end of this bar, and we are also reaching the end of the time frame. So if I scroll further ahead and reach the edge of the time frame, there you go.
That's really cool.
Re-rendered again, and
is it possible to reach the end of the?
No, never. It's an optical illusion. This is so fun.
That's infinity. That's infinity. You cannot reach the infinity, right?
It's like reaching let's call it the end of the rainbow, where you find the leprechaun with the golden coins.
This is very mathematical.
So this could actually be confusing if you don't know. So this is actually a great reason, like a great future iteration, where because if you're just looking at this and you don't understand fading away means infinity, then a person could be like, when does this end? And then they keep scrolling and then they get annoyed. So, I mean, obviously this is like a really, really far nice to have iteration.
We could also consider capping it when we're showing it, like if that's the last one, for example, don't show more than 4 quarters. That would be quite a bit already for an epic, right?
Right. And coming back to what we talked about earlier. Yeah.
I'm also thinking
if you have other epics that end after that, then yeah, keep showing it. But if you don't, if that's the absolute last epic, cap it at a year. So that the timeline doesn't just keep scrolling forever. And maybe show it in a different way, so that you can tell it's open-ended.
Also, to help with the confusion, like if you see that right now, just as it is, it does look weird. You're wondering why it's doing that. But on the actual list view, we could have just the start date, and then make it like, it should say maybe October 5th to, and then in red,
right,
add an end date or something that makes it clear that it's missing an end date because it's not obvious right now.
Yep. This seems solvable, so I'm not too worried about this.
Yeah.
That actually works better than I thought, so I'm pretty happy with this.
So going back a little bit to the first version, the initial version, did we end up figuring out how to do the sorting, Kushal? Do we have that sort?
So we decided to, in case sort order is start date or due date, if it is due date, we would append the items, and if it is start date, we would prepend the items. So at least for 2 sort orders, we can determine whether we want to add items at the bottom or add items at the top of the list. So,
but not in the middle.
No.
Okay.
So that leaves us with 2 sort options, which do not have any preference of where items to put in. And that is an open conversation. Pedro has already mentioned everyone into that issue. Like we would essentially remove these 2 items from the dropdown.
That's fair. Cool. Thanks.
Sorry, Kushal. I thought we are sorting. We're not sorting? Or for this iteration specifically?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm fine with either. So what's the final decision for this iteration? Or like this MR in particular?
So I believe for start and due dates, we would prepend and append respectively. And for the rest of the 2 items, if we do plan to remove these 2 items from the list, then we don't have to worry about inserting the epics in the middle of the list, right?
But I guess So right now in your existing code, you don't have sorting logic. It's just literally putting at the end and at the
yeah.
Okay, and then so you're not explicitly sorting. You're just relying on the fact that you know that they chose that particular sort, and therefore whatever comes later has to be at the end.
Yeah. So in the code, there isn't any consideration of what was the sort order. So if you look at this particular method, which has this add epics,
right.
So I have hard coded essentially to push items into the array. So it would always be appending items into the list.
So if you do just a push and you do the scroll event, whatever, and then the backend gives you like 2 epics, and so there's no guarantee they will be in the right order after you append them. So can we for this iteration actually do a sort? Either at the append, just sort those 2 in that specific case, or actually sort it for realsies in the entire list.
Okay, so what you're mentioning is so for instance, if we have one epic which is coming into the future time frame,
right,
and if there is current epic which expands further into the future time frame. So for instance, we have this epic which starts in September of 2018, right?
Right.
So if I scroll back into the future, 2 new items got added, but this epic still expands. So if you see this network request that happened, we had 2 items pop in here,
right,
and before that we had these 5 items pop in here. So out of these 5, I append only new items into the list. Existing items are discarded. So in this cases, we wouldn't know, right, which ones to sort unless we first filter out the list and find out the new epics which got added into the list and basically sort that. So those 2 new items are already in the order which backend gave us. So those orders are already preserved. So if you look at this request which happened when these 2 new items showed up, last 2 items, so this one is saying this ID and this one is epic start with the undefined. Yeah, so we have this epic showed up in this list. So yeah, the backend is giving the order that we are preserving here while inserting the items.
Okay. Well, let me not try to get too in the weeds with the technical details because we're just not going to, I'm just not going to understand you. So I don't want to waste your time. But I think Pedro said you do want sorting as a requirement for this iteration, Pedro, or you don't mind that it's...
I think the way that Kushal explained it and also the great idea which is a very obvious or now in retrospective it sounds like an obvious possibility to do appending and prepending depending on where they're appending, and so that was a great idea by Annabelle. I think if we do this as Kushal was explaining for the due date and the start date, taking that into consideration, and the backend already gives us the epics in the right order that we need it will solve for those 2 options. For created and updated dates, unfortunately, it will be broken. I understand the technical limitations, but I'm much more concerned about the start and due dates sorting options because, to be honest, I don't see a great reason to have the created date and last updated for this view, and that's why I created that issue for us to discuss. But I mean, this is my opinion. I also would love to hear Annabelle if she agrees or not.
Yeah, from what I understood, the 2 important ones, start date and due date, that will work properly. It will be sorted, and it will not have any performance, some degraded performance problems, right?
Yep.
So I think I was confused too. I thought that those 2 were set, and then the other 2, one option is to remove them, which I like. But if we want to keep them for this iteration, I thought that there was a way that we could do some really poorly performant sorting. Was that an option or no?
Sorting for rest of the 2 items in case we decide not to remove those sort orders.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, we can try and see how it performs. I can create a bunch of epics locally, like around 200 or 300, and let's see how it goes. If it starts slowing down a lot, then we may revisit the problem. Otherwise, let's at least try and sort locally and see how it goes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have one more question. So when you select a new dropdown, can you do that, a new sort option?
This one?
Yeah, I just want to see what happens.
It would start from the fresh. It wouldn't preserve newly fetched epics.
I'm wondering if it would be the worst thing to, if a new one is loaded, just refresh the whole thing and reload all of them in the correct order. And then those new ones that are loaded would have some other visual indicator, like let's say a yellow background. It's not going to be yellow probably, but it would be annoying, but at least they'd be in the right order every time.
Yeah, but
just for those two specific cases?
Just for those two.
I think that's like a lot of extra work, right?
Yeah, because from the backend perspective, what happens is that sorting order is influenced by query params, and Mario would know that. Like when we basically change the query params to fetch in the new list, we would make the whole page reload again, and based on what the backend returned with these query params in place, we would show it onto the UI. So there isn't any way to preserve the previous list. So for instance, if we scrolled like 2 or 3 times into the future, and we are now we had 5 epics fetched from the expanded timeline, then there won't be any way to cache those 5 items locally, and it wouldn't even make sense to cache those, because order of those items would still need to be recomputed again once the page is reloaded. So it is same as
the backend is completely stateless.
Yeah.
But previously loaded ones that aren't in the frame anymore aren't necessarily important anyway.
That's true, but I think Annabelle, that would be like a separate. I think that requires a lot of changes. I don't doubt the design could be a good design, right? Like if you're changing the sort order after you've scrolled and then you wanted to see things in a different sort order, I can see valid use cases for that. But I think for this iteration, that seems, from what I'm hearing, that seems like a lot of work to make that happen. So I would say either remove those 2 options or try to sort them. And I think Kushal is saying it's reasonable for him to try to sort them and see the performance there.
Yeah.
I mean, a local sort would really be just need a re-render, right? Which you need anyways if you change the sorting order. So the question really is, are we going to be re-rendering way too much while the user scrolls?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Cool.
And just one small question, Kushal. So if you are going to try the sorting anyway, would that apply for all 4 cases of created last update?
Yeah. So I want to assess. So I want to assess how sorting performs when there are too many into the list, and would do that for all 4 sort orders. And depending on how it turns out to be, we might as well push it at least for 11.8 and see how it performs in production. If we realize like there are performance problems, then we resort back to our original idea of like appending and prepending items.
Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. So it seems like maybe I'm asking too many questions. You just need to do a little bit more investigation, and we can have a
exactly
better. You're able to answer the questions better. Okay. Yeah. No, I'll stop asking questions. Thank you. Okay. So that was a really long discussion, but it was really good. I liked it. So Pedro, and then we can get out of here. Or Pedro, did you want to talk about those additional things that you added?
So I just you can read it there. I'm planning to go on parental leave. Woohoo! It's good news, but it's bad news for the plan team, because Annabelle will be the only go-to person for Plans UX. Which is unfortunate. I had already voiced my concerns about this back in October, but again, the head count was already closed for last year. But this year, until the end of the year, we're planning to at least hire 1 more user experience designer for Plan. And yeah, I just wanted to share this with the team. And I don't know if anyone has any concerns, any comments that they would like to bring up regarding not necessarily my parental leave, but the fact that we will have less UX capacity.
We'll figure it out when we get there. I would say in preparation, this is a great reminder for everybody to go bug Pedro before he leaves. And so, Pedro, do you have anything that you want us to do before you leave? Like, just to take this opportunity to tell us to work on certain things that you, so that if you wanted to go.
Thank you for raising that, Victor. That's a good question. Today, this morning, I already had a call with Constance about one issue, and it was really good because he reached out to me to go through the design for related merge requests and what we're doing there, and talk a little bit about it. It was great. So we have to do that more. But at the end, I told him that I'm still not sure when the baby is coming out. So I'm kind of putting the last 2 weeks of the milestone on hold. So I don't know if I'll be here on the last week, on the last 2 weeks, or even the last 3 weeks. So I told him to get that merge requests out as soon as possible so I could review it. And that's probably the best thing that you could do now for everyone. Is anything that you would like for me to take a look at before I go would be in the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Pedro. That's helpful. Don't worry, we'll survive.
My only concern is that I want baby pictures within a day. That's it.
I have to be on top of that. I'll create a recurring task to send baby pictures.
Good.
It will be part of my new the daily stand-up.
Perfect.
Fourth question.
Yeah, Andre.
I'm struggling with the mute button, sorry. So yeah, this is just I wanted to ask around, I know that we moved away from doing pre-assignments, but I wanted to ask Sean and Victor more in particular, what are their feelings and impressions so far? I know that we're still following up with the process, but I wanted to hear your thoughts. Do you have any so far?
I think there was a discussion about that in the last retro issue. I think someone brought it up.
I think Yarka did. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Yarka did.
Is it positive or negative though?
Let me go find it. That's going to be easier than that.
While Sean finds it, I can answer that. I like it, and also wanted to add there's like perspective and perception, and then there's also like hard data, which we're not doing, right? So that it's just hard to answer. So I guess it's very subjective and it's very opinions, but I think it also depends on perspective and your, or not perspective, but like expectation, right? So for me, for expectation wise, I expect to be notified when things are done. I expect to be notified when things are being picked up and things like that. So I think with this process, it's helpful, or it's better, because I know which things are going to be done next or should be done next. And I can, for example, hold people accountable for them. And I haven't ever, like for these 2-3 months, I haven't had to ask, like, why didn't you work on this when this was higher priority? Like, I've never had to ask that before. So it appears it's working, or maybe I'm not tracking it close enough. But like in the past, that to me was confusing to communicate and hold people accountable for, because on one day, it's typical in any company, you can say like, today, like horizontal scrolling is the most important thing. Tomorrow, it's like Elasticsearch is going to be the most important thing. And then you have a limited number of people working on things. So it's really hard to communicate that. But with this, you can always point to the list of priorities. And even though in the past we could have done that as well, but by definition of doing pre-assignments, you could always say, yes, that's important, but I don't have anybody assigned to this yet, or this person is like the team is working, has already been pre-assigned to something else. So I think this helps me as a product manager communicate that and hold people accountable. And so it's easier in terms of like actual people providing status updates and just code being shipped and stuff like that. I've never really complained about us going too slow, or obviously I'm not going to complain people going too fast, but I've never complained about people going too slow. I've always just complained about we don't have enough people to do things. So I don't think that's changed. But in my opinion, at least, I can see more people being active in communicating their status. Like people are saying like, oh, this isn't going to be done at the end of 11.7, Victor, and then I respond saying, okay, that's great. Let's move to 11.8. So I've enjoyed that improvement in communication.
Okay. Have you seen any important items not being picked up so far? Like
no.
Because we didn't get to that. Okay.
Well, no.
So we've seen items being picked up because we didn't get to them, but that's because they were at the bottom. We haven't seen anything stay at the top of the list because nobody picked it up.
Exactly.
We've been very good about picking stuff up from the top of the list. I think there have been a couple of occasions where people have picked something that's second on the list and then someone else picked the first thing, but there's basically been no time when. And
they pick from the bottom. Part
of that is like, because I remember when I joined GitLab, we actually basically did this. So like, but there was just one backend team and we had this like priority list, and there was one issue, or there were like issues that like would just move from release to release because like even though they were at the top of the list, nobody wanted to touch them because nobody knew what they involved, which is bad. And we don't want that to happen. And the way we want to avoid that happening is not by telling people, hey, you have to pick the thing from the top of the list. We want to make it clear what you have to do to work on the thing at the top of the list, because if it's not broken, the problem with those issues was that they weren't like clearly defined. So it took a lot of like ramp up time to even figure out what you were trying to do with that issue. I think that's the bigger takeaway from this is that it's been, from my perspective, it's been really positive, but and like basically the only way I would change this now is if people on my team said they weren't happy with it, because I am happy with it.
I saw the like so Yarka was, I think if you can find it, Sean, that link from the retrospective
document
said something.
Yeah,
about,
I definitely recommend reading the whole discussion in that document because I think it was a really valuable one.
Okay. I think Mario is on the call and had something negative to say about it. Well, why don't you?
Yeah, so on this retrospective, this milestone, I actually found myself, I found it hard to keep myself accountable. Just because we were used to having, pre-assignments, it was easy to see, okay, so I need to compartmentalize, this has to happen in this amount of time, otherwise I won't make it. And instead what happened was time stretched for each of those issues. And because I had to go and grab issues, and that's me issue directly. And that's why I wrote in the retrospective that I'm very happy that we're trying this async stand-up bot, because that will keep me accountable. Like I need every day to say, okay, this is my plan for today. And I'll also be saying whether I did not reach my plan for the day before. And that really should help. Like I've already seen it help this week. Where I'm like, okay, so I said I was going to do this. This has to happen today.
Yeah, I meant to say thanks, Annabelle, for adding that channel. I'm really liking it so far as well.
Yeah, Mario, I want to respond to that really quickly and say that, again, the expectations, at least that I have, is that there's always the most important thing at the top, and you work on that thing. And so to me, you get points for always finishing the most important thing. And you don't get points for like, I finished the bottom 5 things. And so, so to me, a measure of success is we say like we want to move fast and all those things, which is great. But to me, at least in the plan team, for me, the measure of success is getting the most important things done as a team, and also a secondary measure of success, which is obviously more engineering driven, is that the merge requests are short or get done very quickly. And, I can impact that by making sure that scope is small and influencing that. But making sure that the review is done quickly and the code is really clean and all that stuff, obviously that's engineering. But like, because you said something about like you felt your velocity was less. I don't know what you meant by that, like you were doing less work or whatever. But like if I see engineers helping each other, finishing something up because you spend your time reviewing somebody's code, or even, I don't know how you guys collaborate in detail, but if you're like, somebody's, sleeping and then Rajat, right? Rajat, do I have the right name, Andre? The new person?
Rajat.
Yeah. He jumped in and finished off an MR that was stuck over the holidays and that I assume just needed a small front end change. To me, that's the perfect example of what our team should be doing, because that's the most important thing in the list. The most important thing in the list is the thing that is, the most important thing in the list is not the direction item, is not the security item even, as long as it's a P2 or lower. But it's the thing that's in review, and that's the most right column thing. So if you can jump in as an engineer and you have like 5 minutes or, you know, like half an hour, that makes more sense, and you can finish off a task, that should be like asymptotically the highest value you can add to the team. And I would weight that 100% or infinite percent more as a product manager. So that's how I view this. And, you know, obviously other.
But Victor, if I could address that, I think there's been 2 changes at once. So it's hard to identify whether the benefits is from one or the other. So we've changed to not do pre-assignment, and we have a better board, if that makes sense.
That's fair.
So there are 2 changes at the same time. So it's good to identify whether that's a benefit of having a prioritized list or ordered list board, if you will, and whether pre-assignments would be beneficial on top of having a prioritized board. Or
well, how would you do pre-assignments if you have a prioritized board? Are you saying that because the way when I'm thinking of a prioritized board, it's a real-time prioritized board. So like the moment you finish something, then you should be looking at the next thing as opposed to going down your pre-assigned list, right?
So yeah, I definitely see it more as an initial pre-assignment, like the initial, make sure that the most important ones don't get attributed by randomness or whenever someone gets free gets that. But we as managers can look and see this issue is more tailored for this person or that person because they already have knowledge or they've been working on a very large issue and want to mix it up with smaller ones. So I think there is some value there that we're kind of changing. However, I think it's still early in the game to make very hard conclusions, but I would hear your thoughts. Yeah.
I would say that, and you know, please push back, Andre, as you're doing right now.
Yeah.
But I would say pre-assignments, I wouldn't like to help with what you just said. I would say instead of pre-assignments, could we say something like, you know, we're already doing this obviously like back end and front end. So we're already pre-assigning issues in that sense, right? And then, so I think what you're saying, you want something a little bit more granular to say, you know, like, you know, a senior engineer should pick up this, or this engineer has more, you know, is Elasticsearch guru, so they're going to do this.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, like, we should still have that. And I don't know a great process for that. I obviously don't want more labels, right? So, but to me, it would be like, you know, you're typing in the comments, you're updating the description to say like, oh, you know, this is an Elasticsearch issue, and Mario's the expert here, blah, blah, blah. And then you just have that ongoing async. But when you come to the list, you're still picking off the most important thing. And then, but since you have that context already, you know, like, oh, you know, this issue, I'm not going to pick up this issue because I know Yarka is going to wake up, you know, in 5 hours, and then she's going to pick up that anyways. So I'm going to move on to do the Elasticsearch thing. So I'm not asking Mario to do epics, right? For that particular reason, because there's probably these pseudo pre-assignments. And so I don't know what's the right way to do that. Maybe it is pre-assignments. But like that's how I think about that. Like pre-assignments to me is too strong.
Right now, this I feel like it's great that we give like the developers the freedom to choose. Right. For example, both John and Jarka picked up some Elasticsearch related things, and since I'm the expert, they've been asking me things, and that's perfectly fine. And that also shares knowledge around the team, right? Which is something we want. So, I mean, maybe we should make it clear that if you don't feel like you can do this, if you're a little bit concerned, then skip it, grab the next second. But then we would have to make sure that that first one actually gets picked up.
I think it's like communication to me. Like in that particular case, I actually think, Mario, that you shouldn't be overly concerned that nobody's picking up the first one. I think that should be a team conversation. It should be something like, you know, everybody's asleep in your particular time zone, so that's not a problem for you, I think. But like if you were, like if you're traveling to Mars or something, I don't know. And then you would say like, oh, I don't really want to do this first issue, or like, I think somebody else should pick up it. I'm just pinging everybody, and I'm just going to move on to the next issue because, you know, I could get it done in 30 minutes. It makes sense. So you make the best judgment as an engineer, and you have some judgment, and there's a mix of things. It's going to be like technical ability, it's going to be familiarity, it's going to be preference. I don't think, but it's also going to be, you know, what the product manager says should be important, right? So I think we should balance that. And I think I'll go out and say that I think like a very high percentage of the order that should be done in should be determined by the product manager in this particular case. So I think the list is helpful, but I don't think it should be like a super like rigid rule.
Right, not a fixed rigid thing. And I agree with you. Like just if somebody skips something, say it on the channel, say why, and that way there's more visibility, and somebody that would be able to do it quickly say, okay, cool.
This is what it already says on the dev backend page in the handbook. Is it's okay to not take the top item if you're not confident you can solve it, but please post in Gplan if that's the case. This probably means the issue should be better specified.
That's perfect.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for the feedback. I think it's useful for now. Let's keep on talking about this and just keep adjusting as we need. Anyone else has any comments? Sean?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I don't think there's a problem if you do pre-assignments and I don't, or if I do and you don't necessarily, as long as the pre-assignments match the priorities that Victor set. Because I think the important thing is those priorities. How we get to solve those is kind of like up to whoever, right?
Okay.
That's a good point, Sean. Like,
thanks.
Yeah, like I have a list of priorities, and it's an interface, and then if you within that your box, you should have some independence in how you want to run your team. So I think that makes sense.
Okay, thank you both and everyone. Any other points? Last minute points? 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'm gonna put this on YouTube unless Pedro doesn't want to share his baby stuff with the world. But if you don't mind, I will put this to YouTube.
If people want to stalk me, they will eventually know I have.
We'll get some YouTube comments asking you to show pictures in the next stand-up meeting.
Absolutely.
I might be one of those parents that creates like a YouTube channel or Instagram account just for my kid. You know, you have those people for their dogs. I will create one just for my kid. Yeah. No, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not that kind of a parent.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for all the time. Bye now.
Yeah.
Bye.